don't have to introduce so much about myself, as it was already said. My name is Dwayne Waggoner, and I'm very honored to be here today to present at the Estonian Lighting Designers Association fabulous event organized a second year in a row. And if I can only say so much so far, if this is year 2, I can't wait for a very bright, well-illuminated future for this organization. So thank you all for attending. I have a bachelor's in engineering from 𝗗𝘄𝘆𝘆έχει𝗲𝗿 from California. I think it's sometimes important for us as lighting designers to mention where we're from, as our daylight experience really molds how we perceive light. I have a master's in architectural lighting design at Hochschule Wismar, so I'm very honored to be able to be presenting next to my previous professor, Dr. 𝗗𝘄𝘆𝘆έχει𝗲𝗿. And I have worked in architectural lighting design in Europe since 2013, as I mentioned, both in interior, as a lighting designer in interior and exterior, and then later on as a lighting designer within the manufacturing industry. So I currently work at Selux as head of lighting applications and culture, based in Berlin, Germany. Selux is a manufacturer of high-quality outdoor products. Many of the topics that have been addressed throughout the day are also a part of our culture's DNA, and we're happy to be presenting some of our products here together with our partner. So we would be very honored if you could come by and check out what we are showing and what we mean. As was also mentioned, I teach a course at Hochschule Wismar. The course is called Conveying Light. I've been having the opportunity to teach the course now for over 10 years, or going on 10 years now at this point. And the emphasis there is how we communicate light, where the lacks of language occurs in our field of lighting design. I'm even honored to have had one of my students here as well in the course. And as I also have colleagues that I've worked with over the lighting industry and professors, you really see how much the lighting industry can be quite a family affair. And so it's not just presenting in front of new people, but it's presenting in front of family and friends, almost to say. So today I'm really excited to present to you a topic that I was very passionate about this last week on the topic of obtrusive light. And as it was mentioned that I'm focused a lot on language, I suggest that we move towards a new vernacular on obtrusive light. Who here maybe has heard the term obtrusive light? Oh, we have some newcomers, but I think maybe we can understand the idea of what obtrusive light is. So, obtrusive light refers to light that is unwanted or disruptive in some way, particularly when it spills over into areas where it is not needed or interferes with our people's ability to experience the natural environment, right? I think this is something that we all experience on a daily basis. There are specific areas, so many of the other topics that were mentioned before with obtrusive light, we break them down into various categories. Some of these categories are light pollution, right? This is also known as uplight or scattering light, right? This has many impacts on various fields of science, such as astronomy, but additionally, not just on impacts of that, but also on nature and biology, bird flight path, etc. Other topics include light trespass, which was also mentioned before by Neri in terms of light spilled onto unwanted areas, disrupting turtle migration. And not just light trespass, but even color temperature now is considered a factor in obtrusive light, as color temperature has had clear significance in many journal documentations about blue light and cooler light having impacts on our health and our well-being, not just on humans, but also on wildlife. So I argue that obtrusive light, so as these regulations shape our shared experiences, but also present challenges to the ever-evolving urban landscape, navigating these requirements is a balancing act and enforces, or let's say supports, the notion that lighting designers are more and more important to be able to navigate these urban landscapes. So obtrusive light serves not only as a technical parameter, but I see it as a metaphor for the tensions between individual expression and our collective experience. The tension highlights the complexity of designing inclusive environments. And underneath one more metric inside obtrusive light is an additional metric in the realm of obtrusive light that I believe deserves special attention. And for that, we are going to focus the rest of the day And I think it's already been mentioned a few times. So for that, I brought my sunglasses, and that's the topic of glare. So for all the previous metrics that we have clearly shown, we have a unified way to approach the measurement. We have communications, we have solutions, we have ways to calculate it, but glare is different. Glare is subjective and has so much to do with the adaptation of our eyes, and it's extremely difficult for us to both calculate and to communicate to one another. But I think you get the point. So you don't have to just ask me. We can also ask other professionals, such as 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗏. 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗏 is a renowned expert in the field of lighting design and visual perception. He's best known for his contributions to the understanding of glare and its impacts on human vision. Boyce's works has been foundational in lighting engineering, especially in the areas of visual comfort, lighting design, for both interior and exterior environments. And what did he have to say about glare? He said it's a subject in a swamp. And I also I heard the term swamp a lot every time anybody talked about what St. Petersburg used to be. So kept thinking about the subject in a swamp and the previous history of your neighbor here in St. Petersburg somehow. And how can we guide through a swamp? A swamp, what maybe perceives to me as a muddy, unclear, unnavigatable situation that we are in. So for that reason, I think it's important that we move towards a new, more human vernacular for glare. How can we better discuss glare? I have seen the topic of glare grow in concern. As I mentioned before, I worked at a manufacturer for outdoor illumination. As a light representative, as a lighting designer within the company, it is so often discussed by my sales team, who I have to continually educate and support. And there is a major challenge in us for us to find a way for them to understand some of these complex technical metrics. And with all these various definitions, metrics, and interpretations, it's also difficult for us to find a consensus, right? How can we all use the same metric or the same methodology? So I don't believe, though, that the challenge is just the metrics, but there is a lot of opportunities in the vernacular. As lighting is not only used by lighting technicians and lighting designers, but also by regular people such as yourselves in this room, I argue that we need a more human vernacular for glare because our discussion for glare is not just important for us as urban designers or lighting designers, but for you as users on the daily basis. But in order for us to be able to, let's say, go through this journey of glare, I decided that we would do a historical perspective of glare as we have some time together. And it's always a good time to look back on what glare meant to us in history. Starting off with the etymology of the word glare in English. The word glare traces its origins already to the Proto-Indo-European root, gel. It's actually where German receives its word gelb. Also, additionally, similarly to in English, it's where I get our word gold. But it meant originally to shine or to be bright, and has evolved over Old French and Middle English, eventually acquiring its modern meaning related to bright, harsh, or dazzling light. But is that definition enough? For all of the context that is hidden behind for us in the word glare, is our definition of the word glare substantial enough? But let's go through the past, because somehow the past always carries with us, especially with language. And inside language, there's a lot of meaning that we sometimes don't mean to convey, but the other person perceives. So what did the ancient Egyptians, how did they design for glare? Well, actually, they built their spaces such that their dark passageways would lead to glare, right? This glare was a symbol to them of the outer world, of connection to the spirituality. And I was watching a documentary recently and found out that not only was it a burial place for pharaohs, but they actually used these places as event spaces for the pharaohs to be. So they were actually already using these places, and I imagine them partying in the evening, having a good time, drinking their honey wine, and then coming out, stumbling out in the morning and experiencing this glare and imagining themselves one day also too dying and entering the afterlife into this world of glare. So here you are. This is what might look like if you could enjoy glare as the way they did in these days. Moving on to the ancient Greeks, I think we're all familiar with Plato. He used the metaphor of glare in his allegory of the cave, of course, where prisoners are blinded by the sudden exposure to light after leaving the shadows, which was an early philosophical reference to discomfort glare, but it also had the associations with representing an enlightenment, awareness, or observation of the outside world. This association with glare would actually be our common interpretation for humans for many years to come. So within the word glare is embedded this idea of enlightenment somehow. Additionally, that continued on through the medieval Gothic era, as you can here see at the images of 𝗗𝗄𝘆 in Paris. Gothic cathedrals such as Notre Dame or Chartres used stained glass to soften incoming light and avoid glare while still illuminating interiors with a divine glow. And the stark contrast between the blinding sunlight and the dark interiors was a common theme in medieval religious art, symbolizing divine enlightenment versus earthly ignorance. Moving on to the Renaissance, in his notebooks, Da Vinci analyzed how the human eye reacts to human brightness, noting how excessive light could obscure details rather than reveal them. His sketches on optical perception foreshadowed modern glare studies that we have today. So you could consider his Renaissance investigations as a precursor to the Enlightenment. Using his analysis, he became a master of the chiaroscuro style, or light and shadow style, and Da Vinci's approach to studying vision from an early scientific approach paved the way for our future understanding of how we interpret glare today. This brings us to the era of Enlightenment, which was paved already by the Renaissance. A key example here would be William Hogarth's Analysis of Beauty from 1753, a foundational text in the history of aesthetics, where he lays out a theory of beauty grounded in the human perception of form, line, and proportion. And he also argued that our eyes naturally gravitate towards what is pleasant and harmonious. He focused on the ease of perception, right? So he's already talking about visual comfort as an important factor to find beauty or to have aesthetics, right? Without visual comfort, you can't enjoy the world around you, or you can't be pleased. His theories included discussions how strong contrast of light could create this discomfort, but also chaos, paralleling discussions of glare in our urban lighting today. So this was also a precursor to the discussions that we began having in the Industrial Revolution. With the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the invention of gas lighting, our views of light and illumination began to change. Light was now readily accessible for people in public, radically changing our urban life. And I think it's really great now in the internet world. We can watch these AI-regenerated video clips of old streets around the world, and you can see Paris in the early 1900s. I'm sure you're lighting up. I can see Roger glowing. And you can see already, unfortunately due to some quality issues, but you can see the gas-lit luminaires and how closely spaced they are, right? And the amount of brightness shouldn't only be concerned or considered in our modern view of brightness, but you have to imagine backgrounds were much darker at that time, right? There was nothing illuminated in that sense. So that source in relation to its background must have been blinding in a lot of ways. So the advent, the first gaslit streets in London in 1807 and Paris in 1829, I think this was here filmed in the early 1900s, introduced unintended glare problems. Overly bright lamps in certain districts caused complaints from residents who preferred softer diffuse light already. So there already became sort of preferences, aesthetics. And with the advent of electrical lighting, cities struggled with overly harsh lighting, leading to early discussions on diffusers or shielding or other mechanisms to implement in order to improve the quality of urban lighting. Philosophically, Walter Benjamin, in his Arcades project written in the 1927s to the 1940s, his unfinished work, I don't know if you're familiar with Walter Benjamin, but he was a German philosopher, cultural critic, and essayist. known for his work on aesthetics, history, and the effects of modernity on culture. And I believe his essays on this regard were the first to, let's say, look back on what these urbanity, our developments in urban culture, how they were impacting our psyche, how we were actually being affected by the way urban developments were growing. And the lighting in the arcades in his project played a significant role in shaping the urban experience. Benjamin was particularly interested in how the lighting in these spaces transformed the city at night, casting a magical glow that heightened the allure of commodities and consumerism. He associated this lighting with the figure of the flaneur, an observer who wandered the city, who was drawn to the illuminated shop windows and mesmerizing effects of light in the arcade. Thus, urban lighting became not just a functional element, but an aesthetic force that shaped the modern experience of the city. With the post-industrialization came the pre-modernism and this sort of discourse around how industrialization was impacting us and affecting us, and ultimately having a lot of sometimes unwanted negative effects on our psyche, right? And that led, in my argument, to the modernist movement, as modernist architecture emerged as a reaction to the rapid industrialization and that perceived chaos and the disorganization of urban spaces in the post-industrialized era. Modernist architects and urban planners, influenced by figures like Le Corbusier, shown here, sought to bring order to the chaotic, overcrowded cities that had developed haphazardly in the wake of industrialization. Oops, sorry, that was quick. This, I think, was a way to react to the cramped, unsanitary, and disorderly conditions that arose in post-industrialized cities where urbanization had often outpaced the ability to have thoughtful planning. So the modernist movement was the first, let's say, conjecture towards thoughtful planning. But maybe they were thinking too much, and maybe they were planning too much. And because there had to be some reaction with every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction, and that could be argued to have been the postmodernist movement. The postmodernist movement rejected this idea of the functionalist and the modernist movement, and the movement shared an anti-establishment attitude with the punk rock music era, challenging dominant norms and conventions. So as you can see here in Hans Hollein's Venice Biennale from Austria, in Venice for Austria in 1980, the postmodern approach to urban lighting was characterized by its embrace of complexity, a reference of a multitude of styles, playfulness, and of course, irony, right? To many of us, maybe it's considered tacky. I don't know where you currently are on your love or hate of postmodernist architecture. It has had some comeback, and it's an interesting aesthetic that we're constantly coming back and forth to. And what I argue is this interplay constantly of the constraints of modernism to the pushback of irony. And this helped to shape and define urban environments in a dynamic but often unpredictable way. As you can see here in Charles Moore and August Perez, Plaza d'Italia, this postmodern approach to urban lighting was characterized by this complexity, as I mentioned, and it moved away from this highly functionist, highly minimalist approach that the modernist movement chose, instead of focusing on the experience of light and its ability to shape and define environments in dynamic, often unpredictable ways, right? So I wanted to reference this postmodernist movement because I ask myself, when will we then be able to bring back that irony inside a more constrained space of today? Do we have the opportunity to bring back the whimsical, the irony, right? Because the irony at the moment has continued inside an extension, which could be an extension of the postmodernist movement, and the deconstructivist movement, also an anti-establishment approach, which continued this idea of postmodernism. And this long period of anti-establishment could argue have been a driver, I think, as maybe the last stage of one of the latest periods or movements. So instead of aesthetic exploration as a rejection to the aesthetic exploration, we should perhaps be focusing more on social responsibility. And that's the place where we are today. And the social responsibility aesthetic has led us to this world of sustainable design. This is the Edge here from Amsterdam. It has been recognized currently, at the moment, as the world's greenest building, having received a BREEAM score of 98.4%. So can we argue that we went from this more post-punk modernist architecture approach to what I want to call normcore, right? I almost consider all of this sustainable design. We feel good about what we're doing, but at the end of the day, I think our next generation is going to call this some sort of normcore, right? It's inclusive, it's acceptable for everybody. And although sustainable design and inclusive design can be argued to not have entirely linked aspects, or let's say are not entirely the same, they do have many aspects in common. And that brings us all back to this idea of inclusive design and what led us to this world now of obtrusive light, right? The definition of sustainable design has ultimately created this inclusive or exclusive boundary between what is good light, what is bad light, guiding how we delineate our illuminated world. As you can see in this diagram, what is in, what is out, what is useful, what is bad, what is good, what is glare, what is intention. But what is glare? We haven't really talked about glare yet, so let's go ahead and talk about glare, and it wouldn't be a lecture of lighting designers unless we mention a few. We can't go through all of them today. The metrics of glare that we have. Like I said, I had edited a bunch out, but there's some interesting ones that I think we could talk about that would be helpful for everybody in this room. If you're familiar, the CIE is the International Commission on Illumination, and they were established in 1913 in Vienna. And it has established many important lighting recommendations and has developed many terminologies for the lighting industry that we use across Europe. The CIE are responsible for the definition of the term obtrusive light already in 2003 with their publication, Guidelines for Minimizing Light Pollution. If you're ever looking for something to try to fall asleep with, this might be one here I would recommend, unless you are really fascinated by this topic, like me, staying up all night reading this stuff now. But inside it, I think what we can get from the gist of it, what's important, is that there are two major categories inside the metrics of lighting design, and they can be better broken down inside these categories. Luminaire-specific metrics and application-specific metrics, right? So the luminaire-specific metrics I can look at alone on a product, I can issue to you on a data sheet, and I can do a one-to-one comparison maybe on certain key features of the product without having to run that in my project or my model. Then you have your application-specific metrics, where, of course, I have to maybe create a model or I have to create maybe a mock-up and consider how that luminaire forms or appears or functions in the given space. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about them, because I know that some of these features were already presented in some of the other discussions, right? So we saw this diagram where you have the term unshielded with a lot of uplight. Then you have partially shielded, semi-shielded, and fully shielded styled luminaires. And of course, as this is luminaire specific, this can be indicated in various forms or terminologies or metrics to be indicated on a data sheet for your specification. And many requirements are existing in certain cities, such as in France. What the requirements are, I would say it's in between fully shielded and partially shielded at the moment in France. And more, there are regulations that are either luminaire specific or application specific But to understand how luminaire-specific metrics for glare work, I think it's easiest to just understand it like this. The amount of light coming out of this 30-degree region will determine how much glare this luminaire has. Simple as that. If I am walking down the street and that luminaire is beaming me directly in the eye from far away, that's considered glare, right? I don't think it's really a complicated concept to understand, and as the luminaire is more down, I walk underneath it, I'm not looking up so much, I have less light spilling in my eyes. That's the general concept. But how many metrics do we have that indicate that and communicate that? Unfortunately, not just one. We don't just have one term that communicates that luminaire-specific metric. For instance, we have France's CIE flux code, also defined by the CIE, our European counterpart, and France uses this quite a lot. They decided on using the Greek pi definition of how a sphere should be divided. It's very, yes, elevated and eloquent to talk in pi. That's the human scale. You know, when I walk, when I speak of radius, I only speak in pi as well. So there's a bit of a challenge there. So you can see how the degrees get broken up, and ultimately the metric defines to you how much falls in this part, how much falls in that part, how much falls in that part, and the next part, and those are all indicated as percentages. So you can see the last one there with 100 represents if my light distribution was there, 100% of the light falls below that line. So again, just dividing up a light into segments and saying how much of the percentage, but it doesn't tell you in which direction. So this is maybe already quite a bit of an older metric. I think already in the 90s it was developed. Moving on, you can look at the American metric from the Illumination Engineering Society. They've gone to divide up the pie even more, right? Or the sphere, the globe, is been divided up. So now not only do you have just metrics from below to down, you're breaking up the luminaire in forwards, backwards, and top. And not just that, but also segments within inside it as well. Another metric, the CIE one we saw, is percentage-based. This is lumen-based directly, so it's not just talking about the percentage of light or the overall quantity. This one is telling you specifically the lumen values inside these indications. So that's why you get bug rating standing for backlight, uplight, and glare. Another thing to consider. But although we have many variations on the theme, I believe that these luminaire-specific metrics at the moment are the easiest to comprehend, the easiest for me to teach you in a short amount of time, and the easiest to ask for clearly, either on data sheets or using lighting simulation software. So I'm a big fan and a big proponent for luminaire-specific metrics. But then let's go ahead and move on to the more complicated area, and that is the application-specific metrics for outdoor lighting. And I said, like, this is where things get a little bit more complicated, so everybody put on your math glasses and let's get to it. We have cumulative brightness effect here with an equation. We have glare control, mark GCM. We have glare rating, RG, and all of these formulas are WTF. And if you're going to use a hashtag or a meme, it's not, it's definitely the math girl meme in this situation. And every lighting designer I know or talk to, nobody's using these, They see these metrics and they immediately go math girl on us. But it wouldn't be my job here with you unless I try to give you some basic understanding of how these metrics work. And just as we experience lighting in our real life, as glare is something that we are human to experience, most of these application-specific metrics reference the background illumination, right? Makes sense. If I go to bed and I turn my light off and I'm using my phone, which we shouldn't do, and it's too dark on the outside, what do? I lower the brightness on my phone. Why? Because the point source illumination that I'm looking at with relation to the background illuminance has changed. That's how all of these glare metrics work. They all assume or calculate or have to infer some amount of the background illuminance in order for me to be able to understand, is that source glary in this context? And that brings a real challenge for us as lighting designers, I was even talking about with Johan, how challenging it is in this day and age to model background luminance. And as you can see here, this is our background luminance now. Do I have to model all of these points, right? This is a real challenge in this world for us to be able to communicate, or let's say calculate, what background luminance is. And you saw not only is it a fact of how we calculate it, but it's also which term and which methodology do we use to calculate. And looking into this, and when you look at it from a linguistics aspect, which I'm also interested in, and partially what I teach on, this has many terms in the linguistics world, and I just will reference one, which is called semantic ambiguity. When different interpretations exist without clear differentiation, it creates semantic ambiguity, where the same term is used with multiple meanings, right? Leading us to a challenge of being able to communicate and also having problems that maybe you're communicating of a different glare metric than I am, or the methodologies by which they're calculated, or perhaps we all don't even really understand how any of these metrics really work. So now I think we all can agree with Boyce that this is a subject in a swamp, right? We're having a challenge in finding ways to communicate this topic, which is why I recommend that we work towards a new vernacular. I can't necessarily provide all of the solutions today, but I can present the point. A vernacular also doesn't have to just be a spoken language, but I also argue that there's other means of technology that we can be implementing as our vernacular for the topic of glare. And so let's go ahead and look at some topics within a vernacular that I would consider components of a new vernacular. And the first one I would recommend is technology as a vernacular. So how can we use technology as a way to help us better model background illuminance, for instance, right? As we mentioned before, that many of these glare metrics in the application metrics realm require some amount of background illuminance or luminance. So I'm constantly looking for new websites that are helping us interpret background luminance, right? Could we zoom in on satellite data to help us better understand lighting qualities within our streets or areas or parks so that we have a feeling for what the illuminance or luminance is of these levels? But as you see, that satellite quality data becomes quite undefined. Oh, that's Aurora Borealis, don't worry about her, it's not happening. It's not really happening. But Tallinn, I was surprised to see how much background luminance Tallinn currently has, at least at this level of detail, not able to really define which parks maybe have what balance from this perspective. So, however, I do think that this is a possibility that we could move towards, right? Satellite data for us to better understand background luminance. Reddit led me to this wormhole where maybe you can use Google Street Maps as an idea that as we drive, not just during the day, but we drive at night, right? Maybe we need to better understand what we're seeing at night because we're going to be driving all night, going to be arriving at 2 in the morning. How do I get to grandma's house if I've never been there, for instance, or somebody else's grandma's house? And I don't know the streets at night. A daytime view is not going to really help me, maybe. So maybe a nighttime view would be helpful for other reasons other than just me as a lighting designer. But let's have a look at some of these random views, and they're quite cute. I can see the house quality. I can have a chance to look at the luminaire. I can zoom around. Oh, that's a nice Great Lake there in somewhere in Minnesota. But the problem is it switches back and forth sometimes to daylight lighting. But I go back in the night. Okay, so it's not so reliable, but I can have a quick view of the downtown area up back to daylight. So not really, unfortunately, yet fully developed, but I thought it was a great way to be able to maybe use technology for us to be able to, same way architects and planners, everybody does these days, is checks the environment out on Google Street, but what if we could have it at night as well? Take it one step further, what if we could use digital 3D modeling satellite data for us to be able to model quicker background illuminance. So I don't know if you're familiar with this feature, Google Immersive View. Sometimes when you click on an icon in Google Maps, it pops up this crazy 3D view. You only can have it in your phone, so that's why I had to do it in this phone format. But here I looked up the 𝗵𝗵𝗴𝗆 National Gallery in Berlin, right around the corner from where I live. Just have a look at it. And I just found out that it has this feature that I never knew existed inside this Google Immersive View, which I like to do every time I'm in a city, fly around a little bit, get a feeling for the space. It already models the 3D architecture quite a bit, but there's a setting, and you can turn it on at night, and you can slowly see how the shadows are falling across the city in a nice way. There's already some 3D representation. Oh, but what? There's streetlights. There's streetlights in the space. I don't think they're accurate. There might be some AI light points. I'm not sure how accurate that is in terms of the data, but it is a quite interesting idea that maybe there already is data for us out there that could be soon adapted into our world of lighting design so that we can better design urban spaces, understanding the context of the lighting that's existing. Then we can talk about products as a vernacular. I won't be talking too much about products. I'll leave the gentleman in between the sessions to talk about products. But in a theoretical concept, there are products on the development, such as at Selux, where as one of the factors inside obtrusive light is duration. It was mentioned as well. Duration is an extremely important aspect in obtrusive light. So what if we were to take the components, also Dr. 𝗵𝗵𝗆 mentioned the importance of vertical illumination in spaces, especially at urban spaces. However, the question rises, do we need that vertical illumination the entire night, right? And do we need extra sources to do the vertical illumination, or could we combine the downlight component with the vertical illumination in a concept that is automatically timed and built into the concept, right? So here you have, is it playing? Yeah. Yeah, you see an evening scene that's going from more crowded to earlier, and then at one point, a downlight turns on, which is more contained, causes less obtrusive light for the neighbors above, and allows for a, let's say, a multidimensional use of the space and defining a time frame for this obtrusive light. Then lastly, I did make the presentation a bit too short. I could have talked about more, but that's my Californian accent. It's moving fast. Sorry about that. We're going to move on to the last topic, which is the new language as a vernacular. As I mentioned before, I'm very honored to have been able to teach a course at Hochschule Wismar for the last 10 years. And the focus is on language as a design tool to explore the difficulties and the challenges in communicating lighting, but also to open up ideas of where we're lacking terminologies, where terminologies are diffuse or not clear enough. And I would like to show one example. I couldn't show all the examples of my students over the last 10 years today, but one that came up quickly was from a gentleman from Argentina, Martin Flugelmann-Olmeida. And here he had shown his picture kind of indicating the idea. There's some glare there. And the assignment is that they have to, in secret, not letting their other classmates know, what term they believe they would create. So their idea is they have to create photos and sketches and ideas and a terminology for a new term that they think doesn't exist and they think is important or valuable to them or potentially valuable to a community. And he lived in Wismar. He's from Argentina, and he lived in Wismar for the year that you lived there. And as you know, the students, through their winter, especially if they're coming from Thailand or warmer climates or South America, their winter can be quite challenging for them with the, as you know here, the similar weather in Tallinn, lots of gray days, lots of rain, such that when spring came, as like a day like today, glare is different than it is during the rest of the time. Somehow glare is what you want, right? And so it was his first time in his life that he experienced what he called glare love. To be glare-loved, he considered to be a sudden attraction to glaring light, the feeling of surprise and euphoria arisen by glaring light, the sentiment of well-being and uniqueness inspired by glaring light, usually produced by the exact alignment of a reflected light beam that strikes the persona's fovea, tendency to happen in contexts where the absence of sunlight is common. So I think we can relate to this idea. I think we were all outside today experiencing a little glare love. He gave it in a sentence: she was holding her umbrella when she was glare loved by the building's window. And he mentioned specifically, he told me when I asked him if I could share this with everybody today, he said, you have to tell them it's site specific. So you too in Estonia can know glare love because sometimes you have to not have had sun to have enjoyed the sun in this way. And so in South America, you will never get glare love. And so maybe like a day like today, you were lucky to have some glare love. And I don't intend, maybe I have to say here, I don't propose that we should all feel lucky every time we are glared by a luminaire, for instance, right? That's not the intention here. But it does, thank you. Yes, love it, thank you. Should put my sunglasses on so I can love it more. But I wanted to present this as a point where we still see that we do need further definitions inside the world of glare, right? We have this umbrella term for glare, but there's sometimes when you like the glare. There's sometimes when the glare is an experience that's important for an artistic endeavor, and there's times when glare needs to be mediated and controlled, such as designing urban landscapes. So I propose further definitions in terms of this world of glare, and that we continue to try to communicate the nuances inside the world of glare. And no, I can't even read. I've had so much glare. Yeah. So lighting designers such as those here in the room, I think, are essential to guide our language and our technology to create illumination that is both inclusive, respects the world's changing needs, and continue to be expressive and inspiring. And with that, I argue the importance for lighting designers in our urban landscapes, and very much supportive of all the community that's here developing this further in Tallinn. Thank you so much.